All right, so welcome another Hot Topic Tuesday. We're going to dig right into it. We know that the market's kind of just really changing. Every day is almost something different. And so I put a last minute switch in here and I brought in this guy. So this is Dave Howarth. I always want to do the H-O.
You got it right.
I got it. Dave Howarth. Dave is with Market Trend Appraisals. So we'll make sure that we get you all his contact information, because occasionally we do gotta make a recommendation or somebody to talk to. Here's a guy that's going to give you a lot of information, give you his insights. And again, we've got a lot that he's prepared. He's put down some notes to be able to talk about. But in the end, we just want to leave it open so that you guys can have any Q&A and just bring it through as we go along. But Dave, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Conley, for having me here today to speak. A little about myself first. I'm going to read off of this because, well, this was a little bit last minute and I needed to take some notes for myself. I shouldn't need to read too much of this, though. I am a certified residential appraiser here in the state of Michigan. I've been doing this for 20 years, primarily in the mortgage lending end of things, but I also do private appraisals for litigation, tax appeals, and pre-listing services. My coverage area is all of Oakland County, parts of Macomb, and parts of Wayne County. I do cover most of those, though. I have a family full of appraisers, including my wife, who actually trained me. She's been doing it longer than me. She's been doing about 25 years, but she was trained by my mother. My mother has trained 4 other family members, and we span over 3 generations with 120 years of combined experience. So there's a lot of peer and a lot of back and forth about experiences and what we're seeing in my family. I also have an 8-year background in architecture, actually computer-aided drafting for architecture, land surveying, and civil engineering. This does play a role into who I am as an appraiser, I believe. I consider myself a detail-oriented person, and my strengths go around measuring homes, fact-finding of both the subject and the comparables, along with the data mining to pull up some market analysis. My belief is that factual property data leads to more educated and therefore more accurate opinions of value. And I mean property data for both the subject and the comparables. We need to look that stuff up and find out what's true if we're using those to value our properties. So I want to get into some of the topics today after a little bit about me now. Want to talk about inventory, prices, time adjustments, and the data. So quickly, obviously, there's been a slowdown in the market since March of 2022, since interest rates went up, and that has affected appraisers in both purchases and refinances. So our volume is double down, if you will. It's to the bare minimum, and we're hoping to see some increases here in the spring. But what I'm seeing as far as inventory is I'm seeing decline in the listing inventory, which is driving a low absorption rate. We're seeing slight increases in list prices right now in the spring. And here I'm speaking of currently, like in the past month, few weeks, some data that we're starting to see. Starting to see shorter exposure times to the contract, getting up there in the list to sale price ratios. We're seeing more, the prices start to creep back up versus the winter, they were coming down a little bit. We're also seeing appraisal waivers and guarantees, people trying to get that contract approved by saying, you know, it doesn't matter if the appraisal comes in, we'll throw in some extra money. And yet to be seen by the data, closings, price increases. I think that we are going to see some price increases here coming out of a depressed winter. Now, the odd thing we had this winter, in my opinion, was we had a lack of inventory. And at the same time, we saw some declines in prices. That's kind of something you don't see. If there's a lack of inventory, there should be buyers fighting over homes. And in this environment, we saw an oddity this winter. And it appears to be changing, though, coming up here in March. I'm seeing buyers, seeing lots of them, but we're not seeing the sellers yet. So that's not unusual. Not unusual for a market to have early buyers and waiting sellers in late winter. Spring should change that. But this feels different this year. It feels like an early desperation from buyers in a way. I say desperation because I'm seeing over list price contracts with appraisal waivers and guarantees already in February and March. Usually we're not seeing that stuff till April, May, June. Really May and June is where the competition gets really high from my experience. In the past, if the buyers lose a house, they just move on to the next one. They pick themselves up, disappointment, and move on. Right now, if they lose a house, well, now they've got to wait just to be able to see another one with the lack of inventory. So that's what I think is contributing towards a little bit of the desperation and the high prices of going up over asking price and whatnot. So where are the sellers? Are they waiting for the spring home buying season? Have they decided not to sell at all due to interest rates? They think that their value is going to be declined? Well, what I would say is this is where I put my faith in agents, real estate agents and brokers. Like every spring, it's time to get those listings. It's time to show the sellers why it's time to sell. With that, I'd start using the phrase seller's market. That's what I'm seeing. We're seeing increases coming out of this depreciated winter, and there are currently more buyers than sellers, and that appears to be pushing back up some of the declines. More we can get sellers in the market, the more we'll see a balance here and start to see price increases. And that's where we need that inventory to increase, something that's driving the market right now, and we'll see where it changes here coming up. Next, I want to get into another big topic, prices and time adjustments. This is a kind of a floaty one for appraisers. Different appraisers do it different ways, but I'm going to give you some of my opinions and the way it flows and my opinion, common sense. So prices have declined since interest rates went up. After a slow but continued increase last spring and summer, prices dropped a little this fall and winter. This is somewhat normal in a stabilized market, though. We'll see seasonal ups and downs, spring and summer being the highs and the fall and winter being the lows. What gets interesting this time of year and what gets interesting now is a year-over-year analysis that we conduct. What are the prices in comparison to the same time last year? Will the prices be less this spring versus last spring? My guess is yes, very slightly, probably due to the lack of inventory, but that could change. We could see a drive up of prices due to that lack of inventory. Forecasting is not an appraiser's forte. We like to look in the past and see the data, see the evidence. But does that mean that you're going to see negative time adjustments in your appraisals this spring? It's a loaded question for sure. Depends on how old the comparable is. Depends on if the appraiser knows what they're doing. It really does. You got to look at the philosophy of it all. So in most situations, the short answer is no. You shouldn't see time adjustments this spring, negative ones, taking sales from this winter and bringing prices down even lower. In most situations, an appraiser should be able to use comps from the last 1 to 6 months. Spring and summer sales should be higher than winter, fall and winter, unless we're looking at a serious decline, which I don't see evidence of right now. I don't think we're in that where we're just seeing just constant decline, no matter what season it is. So an appraiser is attempting to adjust for the price using time adjustments. We're looking to do is adjust from the time that sale occurred to the time of our effective date right now. So in a stabilized market, we're going to have seasonal ups and downs. So if I'm appraising a property in March of 2023 right now, I'm using a comp from October of 2022, fall, just entering in winter about 6 months ago. I need to find and adjust for the market change since October. I'm appraising the property for what it's worth here in March, not October of 2022. So that's where appraisers use time adjustments. Through the winter, we saw a decline down. So if I was appraising the house a month ago, we're going to have some negative time adjustments, but we're starting to see some increases now, where now we're going to start to use that data coming here in the spring and summer and start to, if we're using sales from that depressed fall and winter, we should have some positive time adjustments coming up here through the early spring and summer. So keep an eye out for that with your appraisers. Seasonal ups and downs, we're reacting to between it sold, the comp sold, and where we are now. We're not looking at necessarily the whole picture of year-to-year analysis and just applying negative adjustments to depressed winter sales. That's not accurate. That's not how it should be done. And I'd pay attention to those in some appraisals, especially if we're continue seeing market prices drive up a little bit. So let's see. Just to summarize on that, I have so an appraisal in May, June, July, or August should have positive time adjustments made to the comparables from December, January, February, and March. And these time adjustments would be based on sales data from March, April, and May. So, which should be showing an upward trend. That's what I'm predicting, but we'll see where it goes.
So question just came in as far as the adjustments. How far back do you go in making adjustments, or is that determined by the comparables that you're using?
Exactly. That's where it becomes a loaded question. It depends on the comparables. If you're in a more custom home, a home that doesn't have a lot of comparable data, you might have to go back older in time for those comparables, which could cause time adjustments. For instance, even this spring, where a year-over-year analysis comes in, if I'm doing a year-over-year and I see that this spring is slightly declined from last spring, if I've got to go back to last spring for a comparable, then I'm probably going to be adjusting downwards slightly for that. But that's where it's a loaded question. Depends on when the comparable sold and what market changes have occurred between then and now.
So a time adjustment, we're really talking, we're adjusting the value of the comparable for the time that passed between when it sold and when we're now appraising a subject property.
Exactly. And in a steady increasing market, you're always going to see time adjustments through all seasons. But in a stabilized market, like I said, we should see some seasonal ups and downs. And that's where you should see some positive and negative time adjustments to bring that property to that season.
You know, so it kind of brings up just an additional thought. I'll jump in with you here for a second.
Yeah.
But the aspect of, from a realtor's perspective, we may go 6 to 12 months in looking at comparables. Are there constraints that you as an appraiser have placed on you by, say, a lender as to how long you can go back for those comparables?
Yes, and obviously lenders want us to use as recent comparables as possible. We all hear that, recent. But I will say that in custom homes, we sometimes have to go further out in distance. I've left to different communities, different school districts, and I've gone back up to 3 years in time. Now, when you go back that far in time, you have to conduct analyses to determine market price changes since those timeframes and make time adjustments. So yes, we have no constraints. Even for lenders, I can go back as far as I want, as long as I'm doing an analysis to show what's going on since that time frame and account for it.
And it's interesting because Lydia's put it here, and I know, Lydia, I think we've all dealt with this, but she said it's pretty subjective per appraiser then, especially if someone doesn't want to do the works to find the comps, or not necessarily find the comps, but then justify why they're using an older comp.
Exactly. Yes, it is subjective to an appraiser. It's subjective to the amount of work that they're going to put in. One of the problems with the mortgage lending appraisers nowadays, I'm sure you all know, the work has gotten a little bit lax. They're not very detailed reports. It's kind of getting quick and fast, and that's where you can find some errors in reports. And you know, find yourself a good appraiser and put some of those in front of them and see if they're using proper procedures or not. It's not a bad idea to have a connection there with an appraiser that you could put some things past.
Well, as you can see here, another question: is it normal for an appraiser to call an agent for a question on price?
And I guess I'm going to let you clarify that. What do you mean by price?
Yeah, so Cheryl, jump in on that one. I think I know what you mean, but as long as we've got you there, go ahead and take yourself off mute and you can give clarification to that question.
Okay, well, it didn't happen this year, but 2 years ago, I had a 1-bedroom downtown Oxford, and they wanted to know why I priced it that way. There were no 1-bedroom homes. So I had to go to a condominium. What would they pay for that to get the price for the house?
Yes.
So I got a call on that one. I gotten a couple calls over the years, but I just wanted to know, is that normal? Is it?
Yes, it is. Actually, appraisers should be calling and verifying some of the information with the parties of the transaction. Being an agent, you are one of the parties of the transaction. So an appraiser is just kind of wondering or has some curiosity of, was there something unusual about this? they're always encouraged to reach out to agents to ask questions, whether that be from why did you price it this way to it seems low, was there something wrong with the house, it seems high, was there something with this buyer that made them really want this house, which then starts to leave arm's length. If it was a perfect buyer that may have paid over market price for a property, well, now that's not necessarily an arm's length transaction. So that's good information to ask an agent from an appraiser. If you see this a nominal sale out there, not getting that word, then go talk to the agent and find out why that is. I have experience from years ago in a house I appraised right in my same subdivision up in Lake Orion. I was doing a private appraisal, and we had this one sale that was just oddly low. And I called the agent, find out why. It turned out it was a divorce case, a distressed sale, and it was put under basically what we would call liquidation value, liquidation pricing and value. That made me be able to discredit that comp and throw it out of my report, not put any dependence on it. I mentioned the address in my report and mentioned why I didn't use it, but I wouldn't have gotten that information if I didn't call the agent, because they're not going to put that in the public remarks.
Good stuff. You know, here's one from John Koski, and so how do you adjust for things like the school district when the John, you used a big word on me. I don't know what paucity of comps forces you to expand to a larger. I always look at it this way. The question comes up, but I see it this way. It's, what do I do when I can't, because we know location. What do we do when we can't find comparable properties and we have to expand our search area? And John used, this particular case, a school district.
Yes. So again, analysis. What I'm going to do there is, if sometimes I'm forced to go to a different school district, and the first thing I had to do is look and find out, is there a price difference? So I'm going to look for a commonality. I'm going to find the predominant housing in both of those markets. Most cases, let's just throw out ranch homes, 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. I'm going to analyze, well, what were the low, high, median prices for those group of houses in this community, this school district? Then what were they in the other one? If I can pull out and extract a percentage between those, and realize nothing's perfect in appraising. We have a range. I have a range of maybe somewhere between 10 and 20%, and I need to reconcile down to what my adjustment's going to be. So even that adjustment is subjective, but we're going to go and we're going to analyze the markets to determine a educated opinion of how much we want to adjust there. And then we apply that adjustment. I do it personally in the location line within the report. I like to put it there, put the school district, and then show an adjustment if necessary.
So I think one of the things for us is we need to know how an appraiser thinks, and yet we don't really need to appraise the property, but we've got to be able to get it sold in such a ways that an appraiser can actually justify the value that it's sold for. So for us, it's establish a price with the seller, helping the seller determine a realistic competitive asking price that will cause the buyers to come, make an offer that is acceptable to us, and an appraiser then can actually justify the value.
Hopefully.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't always experience that now, do we? But one thing you need to remember with that is, especially in the springtime, 20 years of doing this, springtime is the evil time for us. My wife's an appraiser too. We dread spring because we have to use the comps coming out of winter, which are a little depressed, a little low. And now we're dealing with buyers willing to pay anything to get the house before the home buying season. So we are dealing with low appraisals coming in on purchases that are starting to increase. And we're going to go through a hard time for about 4 to 6 weeks as appraisers, but then that data is going to start to roll in. We're going to start to see those increased sale prices, and we'll start to get to use those comps in June and July.
Wow. So
this is where positive time adjustments come in. This is where we have to see those and start making the positive time adjustments. So then that's where appraisers start forecasting more. We take some evidence that we see, and then we can start applying that evidence. Right now, we're right at the cusp of it. I'm starting to see some evidence from listings and contracts, but I'm not seeing it yet from actual closed sales. We're waiting for those to close.
So what do we as I'm going to say as the real estate agent, what do we do? Because the market's going there. Is there anything that we should be doing, anything that we can help with? And that might lead into the next question.
What I like to tell, unfortunately, I like to tell agents is you got to convince your buyers that in the springtime, this time, if they make the choice to enter the home buying season this early, they're going to have to make the choice to possibly put some of their own money in the transaction. They're going to have to be the ones to drive up the prices Appraisers can't do it. We're looking in past, we're looking in history. We can't forecast or just say without evidence, proper data evidence, that we can make positive time adjustments and increase. The beginning of this is going to take some buyers willing to put their own money into it. And I say all the time, especially in cookie cutter homes, if you're putting extra money into it, you just became a comp for the other houses in your neighborhood. So 2 months from now, they're going to sell for the same price you bought. So even though you may believe that you're paying over market, in 2 months, that will be market because you just created the comp. So
I like the way that you put that. We are now again looking at appraisal guarantees coming in with offers,
yes.
escalation clauses, appraisal guarantees.
Mhm.
So the aspect of what can we do to help an appraiser, John Lafferty's put the question in here. Do you as an appraiser have an issue with the listing agent meeting you at the property?
Absolutely not. I'm a little bit of an oddity, though. I will agree. I have many family members. I'm in a peer group across Michigan. Majority of appraisers don't like it. I'll be honest with you. I'm an appraiser that does. I like to talk. I have this new thing lately. I say, influence me. Appraisers want to be influenced when that influence is giving us information about the property, updates, has it been listed, how many contracts were on it, were there multiple offers? That's all good information we need to know for the appraisal, and I'll never turn that information away. So yes, I do. I would meet with appraisers. I would get the information out to them and make sure they have it.
So what is the drawback in an appraiser's eyes? Those who don't like to see the listing agent there, what's the issue?
I would say, they don't like to be bothered. They just want to go in and do their job. I will agree that sometimes there is too much talking. I've made mistakes, forgot to take a bathroom photo or something due to too much of this, and I'm bad at that. It's my fault. But so some appraisers, they like to just go in, get out. We sometimes have another appointment. We've scheduled ourselves tight, and having a 10-minute conversation could put us behind schedule for the next one. It's a various of multitudes of things, but that's just up to that appraiser. If what they prefer, what they like, what kind of information. Sometimes getting more information from an agent makes their job harder in some eyes. That makes them have to do more research and look into more things. So
okay, and this is a pretty good question because we're going to run into this.
Mhm.
So there's going to be some low appraisals. I know out of my experience, it's like I almost say, why even do a rebuttal on an appraisal?
I'm starting to hear that.
Most of the time Dave's kind of a friend here, so I'll just say it. Appraisers seem to have huge egos and can't admit that they did something wrong. So if somebody were to do a rebuttal, are there any key elements that we should focus toward or focus on in offering that requesting that rebuttal?
First of all, what I would do is review the data within the report, check the square footage, check the factual information, the things that are black and white. Check that, see if there's any problems with it. If there are problems with it, then that opens the door right away that the subjective items may be more negotiable, because if the appraiser couldn't be trusted to get the factual things right, then maybe they can't be trusted as much on the subjective. So I would look at the factual stuff first, figure out if the appraiser really did a thorough job, if they did all their fact checking on not just the subject, by the way, the comps too that the appraiser used. Look at the interior photos. Did it look inferior? Was there a condition adjustment made or a quality adjustment? There are a lot of factors to look at, but I will say with this, yes, I do get that vibe from people, and I get that comment from people that appraisers just don't want to change. I've talked to many mortgage brokers over the past few months that say, I don't even bother fighting appraisals anymore because they never change them. And one told me that it was something to do with the underwriters, that underwriters are getting a little bit less qualified, if you will, and they're not wanting to escalate it to the person above them. So they'll just kind of say, well, it looks good to me, and I don't think it affected value, so we're just going to stick with the appraisal we have, because obviously they could check that appraisal flawed and order a new one. But I'm hearing that mortgage lenders, processors, underwriters really don't want to do that.
It's one of those that when I'm representing a seller, I question whether or not we even want to go through the process, because you're probably going to lose a week to 2 weeks and have at best a nominal adjustment. And the question becomes, is it worth it? So I've got to go because Lydia brought up a good question. I have to say, through my 36 years, I've gone, wait a minute, how do values actually go up? So she's put it confused, knowing what we've already talked about. How does the appraisal price increase if the fall prices were low?
That's where we're getting back into buyers willing to put some of their own money into it, or transactions working out in that way, because we are honestly always looking at the sales. We're looking at the data. And if that's coming out of the depressed stuff, the only way you're going to have low appraisals until that data starts proving to us that it's increasing and we can start making those positive time adjustments, you're going to fight some low appraisals for about 4 to 6 weeks. And that's why I say 20 years, me and my wife, every spring, this is the nightmare time for us, because the data is not there for us to be able to increase or show these. And we end up in value disputes. And of course, agents telling us we had 5 offers over asking price. How is your appraisal right at asking price? We do try to do our best as a whole. I'll say, speak for myself. I try to do my best to at minimum make the list price in an over asking situation, if you will.
Well, and I think it's an interesting part. You actually have the purchase agreement in hand, correct?
Yes.
Plus any addendums.
Yep.
As long as we've done the right things.
Yes. And I do run into that as well, where we're lacking information. And then after the fact, we get the addendums or information. But yes, we do have all access to all that.
And for those just to know, I was doing subliminal messaging there. We haven't hidden anything under the table. Everything's up front and on the table. So Dave's talking to point out, don't forget to get all of the addendum too, because if you did a price adjustment and he never received it because we never got it to the lender, that's going to create a problem.
Yes.
Because would it be fair to say that, and I'm going to put it the way I've always put it, as an appraiser, your job is essentially not to determine what it's fully worth, but to justify the price that a buyer and a seller have agreed upon.
Well, I hear people like to say that, but I'll actually say no, that's wrong.
And I'm okay with
our
that.
job is not to justify the price. Our job is to come up with market value for what the property is, an unbiased opinion. If our job is to justify a price, that opinion just became bias.
So really then, if it's worth more, you're going to stick with it's worth more.
Yeah, I've appraised for more than contract. I've appraised for under, I've appraised at. Really, an appraiser's job is to block out that information. Here's the reason we have the PA. It's to look for things like personal property, sales concessions, things that may have affected that sale price. In vacation resort communities, I almost moved to South Carolina once, and I found out that in the Myrtle Beach area, I found out that, well, most properties there are sold fully furnished. And that now, as a real estate appraiser, you have to start becoming a personal property appraiser too, to determine if was this furniture in this comparable better than the furniture in this sold in the subject, and start adjusting for those things. So PA is used for things outside of just trying to hit that particular number. We actually, as appraisers, should be blocking that number out and trying to come up with our own opinion, and then let's see if that's near the contract.
Should be.
But we all are human. And as I just said earlier, I do, even if I see a value coming in low, I will struggle, and I will not, I don't want to use the word push, but I'm just going to try to push everything I can, every penny I can out of my adjustments to at minimum get to the list price, because that just makes sense to me. If this is value is what a buyer and seller are willing to have a transaction for. And if the seller is willing to sell it for 200,000, but they got an offer for 220, well, market value says one end of the transaction was willing to let this property go for 200. And then the other end, we're seeing evidence that many are willing to pay more than 200. So at a bare minimum, as an appraiser, how could I say that it's worth any less than the 200? I can't.
So here's a shift, and Scott, you might have to jump on and get a little bit more to the question, because he's just put, how big of a factor is limited supply? And I'm going to guess that means in regards to, and Scott, jump in if you got to clarify, but I'm guessing that means if active properties in an appraisal, is that an impact upon what you're able to come up with? Because I think we know that the limited supply actually affects our values
Yes.
because again, law of supply and demand.
Yep.
And Scott, if it's something different from that, go ahead and put that or jump out and let me know.
Right, which
Well,
one?
that's basically it. Just how, if the same house selling today when there's nothing else available, it's supply and demand, right? So it'd have to
Yes.
increase the value on some level.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, it is a factor. It is a factor there that we have to review that. I am looking at listing prices when I'm doing my appraisal. I'm looking at, are the listing prices right now higher than the listing prices, not the sale prices, for some of the sales that have occurred. So I can start to see if those listing prices are ticking up. And although I can't use them to determine my market value, I can use them to just start to word and let the underwriters know that we are seeing some movement, an upward tick. That evidence will then start to roll into when I start to see the sales. Now I've got active listings ticking up. I've got list to sale price ratios ticking up. I've got days on market going down. And now I've got a couple sales that are supporting what I've been seeing from active listings for a month and the lack of inventory. So yes, now I'm going to start to make a time adjustment. So the lack of inventory does affect buyers, which ultimately will affect the sale prices, which affects us.
And that inventory, the actives, basically give you an indication as to where the market's also heading. Does
Yeah.
it help with that?
Yes, it does give us an indication where it's heading, but unfortunately from our world, it all has to be factual. We can put listings in the appraisal. The lenders, especially if we're checking the declining box, they want to see 2 listings in our appraisals so that they can see, well, what's the future? Are listing prices even lower than sales? And that shows them they can kind of see a forecasting of things changing.
So we got a question here in Rochester.
Okay.
My question is concerning an FHA appraisal.
Mm-hmm.
That appraisal is following the property for 6 months.
So regarding the FHA property with a FHA appraisal, the appraisal will stay with the property for 6 months.
I thought it was 5, but it could
Might
be
be
6.
5.
They're changing that all the time.
Okay. So with that said, what happens if that deal is not through and there's another FHA approved buyer that comes to the table and they have an appraisal done? The initial appraisal that was done kind of captures that property for 5 or 6 years.
Yes.
Are you as the appraiser privy to that first appraisal? Is that how you know this is what price it was appraised at?
So let me give that basic scenario.
That's what I want.
So we get an FHA offer, it gets accepted, appraisal's done. We know that it's somewhere 5 to 6 months that it will stick with that property. If another FHA agreement is accepted, then that sticks to the property. And I believe that appraisal is the one that gets used, but I'm going to let this guy
But
clarify.
the direct question back was, are we privy to that first appraisal that was done when a second one is done? Well, the first thing is the second one isn't done. What happens is once the first one is done, when the lender goes and applies for that FHA case number on the second buyer, HUD is going to tell that lender, there's already an appraisal attached to this property. No appraisal needed. Here's your appraisal. Here's your value done. No second appraisal even gets ordered. So no, we wouldn't see the first one.
You wouldn't even, there wouldn't be a
There wouldn't
second
even be a
appraisal
second
done.
appraisal done. Because
I kinda-
the buyer, the lender always has to get the case number prior to the ordering the appraisal. So if there's already an FHA appraisal attached to that property, when that lender pulls the case number, they will be notified of that. Now, granted, this isn't my end. I'm not a loan processor or anything, but this is what I know about the process.
You don't actually get to see that appraisal report, nor does the buyer who's requesting.
The new buyer?
the new buyer.
The new buyer will see it because as soon as the lender finds out there's already an FHA appraisal, they'll have immediate access, from what I understand, to download that appraisal from HUD, get a copy of it, and that's the appraisal they now use for the loan. Borrower name doesn't need to change. None of that stuff needs to actually change per HUD. They just use that appraisal, same lender name, same original borrower name. It's just that's fully attached to the house now.
So no second appraisal would ever be done. There wouldn't be a second appraiser.
Now, if we go beyond the time, They wouldn't, no, because the appraisal's already there. Now, let's say it's beyond 6 months and we know the sellers know that there was already an FHA appraisal done. It came in at value X, but now we got a new FHA buyer. Now, yes, there's a new FHA appraisal and we have the appraiser themselves have no access to that first appraisal from over 6 months ago.
Is that a recent HUD change, Darwin?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Is that a recent change? Because I went through this maybe a year and a half ago, and the buyer that I was representing had to offer to pay the first borrower for the appraisal so that the lender would release it to my buyer. Is that no longer the case? It just automatically goes to the next buyer on that home?
Well, as I said, this isn't my area of expertise. I'm not a loan processor. But I will say that based on what you just said there, that doesn't sound like proper procedures. It sounds like, to be blunt, extortion. I mean, that's not something that should be going on where they're charging the second person for that first appraisal. It's already attached.
Yeah, that's weird.
I've never heard of anything like that.
I guess we were extorted.
Yeah, I don't mean to use that word. I know it's scary, but that's the first word that popped in my head. It's like, so they tried to charge them for the use of the appraisal. Legally, they had use of that appraisal without getting charged. And there's nothing the first lender can do to stop that. That's a federal law.
So I think, Nicole, you were trying to jump in here with a question also. Nicole Freed, no? If not, I got another question here.
Still kind of related to this scenario.
Yeah,
So we're still hanging on that same scenario. You know what? Hold on, boss.
there you go. We're going to put a mic on her so that way everybody can hear.
What happens if now the second buyer comes along after this first FHA approval, or I'm sorry, appraisal?
Uh-huh.
Second buyer comes along who's now approved with a conventional loan. I know that she is going to have to pay for an appraisal.
Yes.
But I'm also wondering if, and I guess this is a long shot, but if the FA appraisal came in at say 243, which was less than what the property was listed for.
Mm-hmm.
Now the new appraiser goes out and appraises the property again for this conventional approved buyer. Do you think that those two appraisals may come in around the same, even though one was FHA and the other is conventional? I wouldn't think that that would have any effect on the value, but what I'm thinking is that the appraiser that did the FHA probably still used some comps within that subdivision or within a 1 mile radius. So the second appraiser is quite possibly going to be utilizing some, if not all, of those comps. So
but
the possibility of those values coming in pretty much the same would be
Not likely.
not likely.
First of all, the first problem we have, excuse me, the first problem we have there is a 6-month time difference. There could be a completely different comparable set used by the second appraiser there just because of timing.
But this just happened. We're talking about.
Oh, okay. So it's an appraisal that was done and then 1 month later, they're getting a conventional appraisal done. Chance in that case, yes, hopefully they would be close. However, I will say this, appraising is just an opinion. It's an educated opinion, but an opinion. And we're going to have differences between each other. I've heard through the years with litigation that when a judge gets 2 appraisals done for a divorce case, if they're within 10% of each other, he'll just average between the 2 and call it a day because a 10% difference between appraisers is somewhat expected in litigation and is normal. But with that difference is more than that, that's where they start to put the 2 appraisers on stand and try to figure out who's more correct, who's more accurate. So no, just the fact that you have 2 different appraisers would tell me that the numbers might be different because it is all subjective. But it's finding, yes, the right one as far as the right adjustments, the right comparables being used. And if you have one that happened that way, if the FHA one is higher, yeah, I would throw it back in the face of the conventional appraiser and say, why is this? Ultimately, there should be no difference for value changes. We're using the same comparables. There's no rules differences between conventional or FHA that should cause a value difference.
So
Within 5% of each other, I would say is to me is an acceptable variation between appraisers is about 5%. You start getting 5 to 10%, I start raising my eyebrow at one of them.
so here's this is actually a very good one because it's come up before, concessions.
Mhm.
How do those impact? How are they used? How do we adjust when there's a comparable that a seller paid concessions?
We're trying to get to the cash equivalency of the sale. So we use round numbers. If it was a $200,000 sale with $10,000 in concessions, the cash equivalency was $190,000. And we need to look at, when we're as appraisers, we need to look at, did that concession actually affect the subject property and what it sold for? One indicator of that is if it's a $200,000 list price and it's sold for $210,000 with 10 grand in concessions, that affected the sale price. So then I'm going to adjust downwards by 10,000 off that sale price to accommodate for the concessions. Now, if it was a $200,000 list price with a 195 sale with 5 grand in concessions. Now, I'm going to start looking at my subject and all the other comparables. And if I start to see that comparable looks like that 195, 200 area was a proper price for it, then I'm determining that the concessions did not appear to affect the sale price. And now I'm not going to adjust for the concessions on that one. So you could see in one appraisal that one comparable is going to have adjustments for concessions and another one won't. That's based on why those concessions took place. How high did the sale price go to accommodate those concessions? So there's a lot of factors that go into that.
And yet it appraised.
Yes.
So there's not a really good.
Well,
answer
we
for
don't really
that,
know
is
if
there?
it appraised. Just because it closed, that seller could have put money into the transaction, or typically with concessions, though, they don't have money to put into it. So we can kind of take a leap
That's
there.
it. And
Yeah.
that's why, I mean, guys, it's a great question, and I appreciate the open answer. And because I personally have gone, well, wait a minute, if it sold for 210 and it was FHA financing,
Mhm.
more than likely it appraised,
Right.
and yet we're gonna take and knock off whatever the concessions was and say that, when really it was only worth this.
Right. What I can't do is I can't accommodate for what another appraiser may have done. I can't see their report and see why they made value. All I can do is see the evidence that I'm seeing on that comparable and adjust what my opinion
So
is.
those adjustments, really, you're going, okay, that was justifiable price, or no, it wasn't,
Yes.
and making a
Yes.
decision.
I'll
So-
be honest that most of the time, if I'm making an adjustment for concessions, it's because that was built into the sale price. It was the situation of 200,000 list, a 210 contract with 10 grand in concessions. That's typically, other than that situation, I'm typically not adjusting for concessions.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I won't beat you up on that one.
It's a loaded question, and every
Yeah.
appraiser is going to have a different opinion on it.
So that was that one. Okay, so I like what John's got here. Let's take a look at that one. The AMC, for those who don't know, an AMC is an appraisal management company. So our AMC's area specific. So when a lender sends a request for appraisal, they know which companies are familiar with certain areas like lakes in Oakland County.
We would all hope so, but unfortunately, no. AMCs, you probably already know this, so I'm just going to say it. AMCs are hiring the cheapest and fastest they can find. It's their business model. They make X dollars on the appraisal coming through, and their job is to hire the cheapest appraiser they can find. And at the same time, they sell quality to their client, the lender. They sell that they're hiring the best and the most proximate, but from the appraiser standpoint, I'm just going to give you the truth. That's not what happens. So yeah, when I would personally, when an order is going through an AMC, I would pay close attention to where that appraiser is coming from. I see nothing wrong with asking questions up front when that appraisal is being set up of where are you coming from? How much experience do you have here? Personally, I see nothing wrong with an agent rejecting an appraiser and saying, calling back to the buyer's lender and saying, yeah, I interviewed the appraiser and they're not from this area. They don't come here. I'm just not trusting this. I'd like to see the AMC reassign this.
I think, by the way, maybe one of the most valuable pieces, and definitely as far as advice, what I just heard was we should actually, when they call in to set up, we should actually interview them and
Yes.
find out what is their background, what's their knowledge, how long have they
Exactly.
been doing it, are they familiar with this area?
Exactly. Hey, this is your buyer's house or your seller's house. This is your listing. Why is it out of line to check their credentials of the appraiser, the one person that's got the be all end all voice? And if this transaction is going to go through, it's the last checkbox. Let's make sure they're qualified.
I like that.
Get a resume. and challenge it. I don't know of any law that exists or problem with an agent calling the buyer's agent and saying, listen, I talked to the appraiser, I'm not comfortable. And really, as a seller, do you have to let anyone in your property you don't want to? Nope. You could just say, we're not letting this appraiser in. If you want to buy our house, you're going to hire a different appraiser. We don't agree with this appraiser.
And
Does
you
that set the wrong tone though?
Go ahead, Scott, say it again.
Does that set the wrong tone with the person though? I mean, how do you not take that personally as, how do you tiptoe around that, I guess?
Well, that would be a personal choice to you as an agent, how much you want to tiptoe around that or what you want to challenge. I personally, if an appraiser is coming from downriver up to northern Oakland County, have you ever lived here? Why do you come up this way to appraise? I mean, that's your level of comfortableness of how much you want to challenge them. But again, like I said, this is your transaction, your seller's property. I see nothing wrong with asking some questions and challenging.
I like that. So here's an interesting question. And I think I know where Lydia is going, but if a buyer purchases a home under market value, because the seller just wanted to get out, it was, maybe it was arm's length, something of that nature, liquidation. Why doesn't the appraisal, when it's financed, the appraisal come in above value?
Mine do.
And I thought that's where you would go.
Yeah, no, and that's where we got to block out the contract price. And I will say a lot of appraisers out there have, and I'm saying mortgage lending appraisers have no idea how to appraise without an estimated value or a contract price. Good appraisers, we're going to block that out. And I come in over contract all the time, especially in the fall when I'm dealing with sales from the spring and summer. I sit there and look, wow, look at the deal they're getting. Look at the deal they're getting. And that's just the way it works out.
I like that. And that's what I expected you to say.
Where are we at for timing?
So
Okay, we got some time.
we got a lot of questions. So this came out better than we anticipated. You guys are doing
Good.
great. So if I'm listing a 2-bedroom home with square footage larger than 3 bedrooms, oh, this is a good question.
Yes, it is.
How's that affect value?
Well, for the lenders, we have to bracket everything. So we're going to need to find a 2-bedroom comp, and that may cause me to go back further in time, further out in distance. But ultimately, I've been on this philosophy for years. I think that as a society, we're becoming less dependent. Large families aren't happening as much. People are having fewer kids. I just did an appraisal a couple of weeks ago where this master suite on a 3,500 square foot house was comparable to multi-million-dollar homes. It was 3,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath. But I saw the value there. I compared up against 4, in that a buyer that doesn't have more than 2 kids, they may pay more for that house because it has this awesome suite that they're not getting in a 4-bedroom, 3,500 square foot house. So the buyer may pay more for that 3-bedroom than they did the 4. So it all depends on your buyers. And I've been seeing a shift for a long time that we're not seeing as many people needing that 4 and 5 bedrooms. They do exist. Obviously, people have large families, but I'm not seeing necessarily a price difference between that. You could have one buyer that wants the larger bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and another buyer that needs 4, thus they're all a little smaller. It's all in those buyers' preferences. I'm not seeing much of a price difference nowadays on that subject, though.
And that kind of goes back to the what if I can't find comparable properties. I know I always teach people, don't compare a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom if you can at all stay away from it.
Right, but we all know 2-bedroom comps don't exist, and especially 1-bedroom ones. So I mean, that's where I say you guys have a little bit of levity that we don't. It's a little bit of like, well, let's just throw it on the market and see what happens, get some feedback on prices and see what people think. And maybe we'll find the perfect buyer that only needs 2 bedrooms and this is the perfect area. So sometimes you'll get lucky. So I say that to agents all the time, throw it up, see what it sells for, see what kind of feedback you get when you got an oddball.
Absolutely. Especially again, we're in that inventory, low levels, throw it out there. What are we going to lose? And what do we have the opportunity to be able to gain?
Yes.
So let's see. Here's a great one. I'm going to change your question up a little bit, Scott. So is it important to know the number of showings, the number of days we are on the market, how many offers that we got, all of that additional information? Is that something that would make sense for us to provide to an appraiser?
Well, I smiled there because that's actually the first question I ask when I meet agents. So how did the sale go? Was it quick? Did you get lots of offers? I want to know that firsthand information from the agent. So yes, it's important. The fact that I'm asking it, my first question when I walk into a home, yes, it's important.
I like that. I like that. Okay, let's see. Yes, and whoops, I got to get to the right mouse here.
You know, I'm going to add to that. I would
Yeah,
even
go ahead.
say beyond a verbal, I'd even say it's good information just to put that down on paper and hand it to the appraiser, give him some of the statistics, if you will, the factual information. And you just saying, oh, we had 5 offers. That goes in one ear and out the other with some appraisers. You put it down on paper saying that, and actually, if you're available to citing what those offers were or anything like that, yeah, that's information. And once you put it down in paper and writing, now as an appraiser, I can cite that information in my appraisal because I've got it for my work file. So that's something that can add to the validity of the appraisal, why I'm making time adjustments a certain way. We want to provide information to the underwriters and have that question come up. If I make a positive time adjustment, the underwriter says, well, why? I'm going to start to hone into some of those things. Well, we had these market conditions. I spoke to the agent and I put in my appraisal already. This is what the agent said about the multiple offers and everything. All of this stuff plays into getting that underwriter to accept my appraisal, and realize that too, it rolls into something else. Realize my job as an appraiser, and sorry if I banged on that there, is to get an underwriter to believe me and to get the loan to close. And if I go too far with things and put too many questions in their heads, sometimes they won't believe it, they won't depend on it, and they want to go to another appraisal, or they just start to not depend on me as an appraiser. I build relationships with underwriters at local lenders. It's kind of hard to do with management companies and large lenders, but local lenders, I have relationships with the underwriters, and they'll get to trust me and know me, and they'll get to trust that I'm doing the right things. And then someday when I have to go out there just a little bit to make that list price or just to hit that extra number, now I've built a trust with the underwriters, and now they're willing to look at something and go, well, okay, a little questionable, but Dave did it, so I trust that he did the right thing.
So this is actually a good question too, because again, we are getting the appraisal guarantees and even more an appraisal waiver.
Mm-hmm.
So John, if I'm getting your question right, we sold a house and there was a waiver of the appraisal by the buyer, but the lender is still going to require
Yes.
the appraisal. So is that correct, Ken? And if so, can you explain the role of the appraiser then? Why is the appraisal still being done if the buyer waived it?
Because ultimately the buyer is still getting financing, and the lender needs to make sure that they have the equity in that property to protect themselves. And even though the buyer may be putting in extra money, the lender still by federal law has to have that information to make sure their loan is protected. And just the fact that the buyer has some money to stick into it doesn't necessarily answer their question. So they're going to get the appraisal done to figure that out. Now that money's coming in, so most likely the lender is going to find out that they're more than protected. And in this modern day, we're getting appraisal waivers from the lender side, that they're looking at credits, income, down payments, and doing an automated value on the property and determining, yeah, we don't need an appraisal at all.
When that happens, do you still have a role as an appraiser when a lender issues an appraisal waiver? Is there anything that you as an appraiser do, or it's just done?
It's done. Appraisal was never ordered from us. The lender, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they decided to, their risk assessment is we have no risk. And in this, there's plenty of equity here, and we're going to go ahead and do the loan without an appraisal. And we have nothing to do with it.
And often that's done because Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac have most of the secondary market. They've got all of these homes already that they own, have lent on. They've got that information.
Yes.
And that's what they're using when they come up with that waiver.
Yes. Which kind of segues into something that was in my thing here that we didn't talk about much, is property data. I didn't get into that sheet here, but yes, the property data, they've been mining, Fannie and Freddie, the GSEs, the government sponsored entities, GSEs. They've been mining data from appraisers for over 10 years. The UAD, Uniform Appraisal Data Set, some of you may have heard of. They've been having us the C ratings, the Q ratings. The way things are formatted in our reports are basically dictated by the lenders, so they could pull all that information, build a database on the comparables So then down the road, when your subject is selling and they have information on the comparables, they can use that more accurate data to do better value models. Let the computers generate it. The biggest flaw to computer generated values in the past has been the data. Public record data is flawed. It's not accurate. It's not thorough. And if you try to do a computer modeled value based on public record, it is going to be flawed. Thus, you have Zillow.
I'm sorry. Choked up there.
But you know, one thing I will say about Zillow is one thing they do understand is they understand the data is flawed. So what they've been doing is they've been trying to get their own data for years from the homeowners themselves. They're letting homeowners populate the data fields. But what Zillow doesn't know, and none of us know, is how accurate is that data that they're getting homeowners to populate. It's biased. It could be incorrect to make the home look like more than it is. So they're getting thorough, but not accurate, that we know.
So, Nicole, you might have to clarify because you put, what do you do if a lender won't use it? And I can't figure out what it is. Are you talking the information, the extra information?
No, this was a while ago. So, like a while ago in the meeting. So I had a situation, FHA buyer, appraisal was done. We were supposed, so in September. And then that deal fell apart, buyer backed out. And then we get another FHA buyer and all this, I'm only 3 years in this business. So all I'm told is, hey, that sticks with the property for 6 months, 5 months, whatever. We were well within it. No, it doesn't. That lender refused to use that appraisal. And then the jerk thing of it was, the first appraisal that came in September was 10 grand over what we were under contract and asking. And the one that came in December, and he is renowned for being very conservative, he appraised at 10 grand under. So my seller lost 10 grand and I fought it and I fought it and I fought it. And everybody that I fought it with, including the lender, was like, no, that's not accurate information. So I guess
can tell you from experience, the 5 to 6 months, unless if that is recently changed, is still applicable. What happens is occasionally the transaction didn't get far enough along to where it had an FHA file number. And if there was never a file number where it got to FHA, then in the eyes of FHA, that appraisal didn't exist.
so is there
Used to happen a lot, but actually the things in the past couple of years we've seen change because now processors, they're not supposed to order an appraisal unless they have that case number first.
Wow.
and they did ask me
Real quick, we were seeing that years ago where lenders were, from appraiser standpoint, lenders were ordering appraisals. Then after they found out if it came in at value, the value they liked, then they would give us the case number. So FHA came in and said, no. You're not value shopping this and ordering appraisals, then assigning a case number to the one you like. So they started requiring the lenders to actually get the case number before even assigning the appraiser. And that way, everything is known throughout the whole process. HUD knows who the appraiser is. They're expecting to see an appraisal turned in. So if that one comes in low, the lender better be giving HUD an explanation of why they're not delivering that appraisal that was ordered. Not just, it's going to have to be a reason that we didn't end up completing it for reason X, Y, or Z.
Good stuff. So I think we probably got last question here, but can we suggest to our mortgage company to use our appraiser? Let's say I went, oh, I like this Dave guy. Can I get him on mine because he's obviously somebody with integrity and he will work to do his job correctly if we wanted to get Dave on a file?
Right. I can get on approved lists. I could be put on an approved list with a lender, with many other appraisers, and in most situations, we're put into a rotation. Can an order specifically for this address be pushed to this appraiser? No. In this current age, that's illegal, not only with management companies, with all lenders. There has to be somebody between the loan officer and the appraiser that's just rotating these through with no bias, no predetermined way of getting it there. There are things that go on in the industry I won't get into with management companies, but in short, the best way to have me work on your assignments is just to get me approved with lenders, get me in the rotation, and sometimes you'll see me there. I can also work with lenders, and I have several lenders that I'm their go-to for calling if they have another appraiser that they see something they're raising their eyebrow about. Hey, Dave, can you take a quick look at this for me and see, do you agree with what our other appraiser did over here? I've got some lenders, they're high ups. They'll before they even talk to the underwriter or put in a reconsideration of value, they'll run it by some of their other trusted appraisers to see what they think.
So let's see if we can answer this one quick and then we'll
Mhm.
wrap up. Can the lender's underwriter refuse to accept an FHA appraisal?
Yes.
So there you go. The underwriter can do that, not the mortgage officer. It
And
would be the
this
underwriter.
ties back in, and I'll be really quick here with what the other question came up about that FHA appraisal that the lender did not want to take. If an FHA appraisal is done and it's attached to the property, lender B, the second one, gets a copy of that appraisal. They still have to review it and underwrite it. If their underwriters don't agree with that appraisal, they see a flaw in it, they see a problem, and now that can't be corrected because that appraiser worked for lender A. So it's the lender B can't call the appraiser and say, hey, we have some questions about your reports. Can't happen. Lender appraisers shouldn't be talking to lender B. It's not their client. So at this point, if lender B finds a flaw in the appraisal and they don't want to accept it, they tell HUD that, they deem it flawed. HUD gives them the ability to get a second case number and a second appraisal.
There we go.
Yep.
So Dave, let's get them your information.
Yeah.
So get your pen and paper out. So if you ever got because here, people will ask for referrals to an appraisal or an appraiser, excuse me, for an appraisal. So they would reach out to?
Yep, Market Trend Appraisals. And remember, Market Trend is spelled with one T in the middle. I kind of mashed those two words together. So markettrendaappraisals.com. And my phone number, my cell number is 248-935-7700. My email address is as simple as dave@markettrendaappraisals.com.
Last name is spelled?
Howarth, HOWARTH. And one more quick thing I want to, mention to y'all, because I didn't get into one thing. I had it here in my planned information. Property data. I want to please start to think about that. Get your homes measured. We talked a little bit about the flawed information of public record and how that exists and how it affects property values. And getting your property data correct, I think, is going to be one of the new things that we all need to get on, getting off of public records. And one way to do that is getting appraisers to measure your homes. By the way, qualified appraisers that are good at measuring. That's something you'll get through experience and time of knowing someone. But getting that data right and getting off of public records is kind of something that I'm all about.
So there we have it. Another wrap up to another Hot Topic Tuesday. This one, the deep dive. So next Tuesday, noon, another hot topic. We'll see what it is then. Have a great one, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.